Chapter 6, Storm. Save a seat in your heavenly whale for me. Big Bart crossed his arms and stood stock still, like an enormous statue.
"I'm not going," he grunted. "Don't ask me again."
"But the boat is ready to go," I sighed. "Everyone's waiting."
"Don't care," muttered Bart. "Not going."
"Chicken," clucked Tomo.
"Not going,"
"Buck, buck, buck," I added.
"Sticks and stones," Bart answered. "Not going, not going, not going."
"But everybody else is going," I pleaded. Bart recrossed his arms and sighed.
"To quote my dear old mum, if everybody else jumped off a very high tower or a very high mountain or some other very high thing, would that make it all right for you to jump off as well?"
And then without waiting for a reply, he added,
"Thought not."
"But nobody's jumping off a very high thing," argued Tomo.
"Jesus just wants us to get in the boat and cross the lake. He's our teacher. He's our friend. Is it so much to ask?" "So much to ask?" asked Big Bart. "Why don't you ask my great-uncle Jonah?" "Oh, that's right. You can't. And why can't you? Because my great-uncle Jonah is dead. That's right. Dead, departed, deceased."
I rolled my eyes. "We've heard the story before. There's no need—"
"Oh, I think there's need," Bart interrupted. "A great big stinking pile of need. You may have listened to the story, but as our friend Jesus is always telling us, you did not have ears to hear the warning within."
And then he uncrossed his arms and held them wide in a dramatic pose.
"I was just a tiddler, and there we were, at the annual Sea of Galilee Water Jubilee. It was the 10th anniversary, and the organizers decided to put on a pageant to celebrate the date. The story of Jonah was chosen because of its nautical theme, and my great-uncle was asked to play the lead role. An obvious choice because of his name," Tomo interrupted. Big Bart glared. "Because of his stage presence and his booming voice," Bart boomed. "Half the men in my village are called Jonah, but only my uncle could have played that part. There was, however, one small problem. Like me, great-uncle Jonah was no fan of the high seas. So his friends, his so-called friends, persuaded him to take the role. All went well at first. A local fishing boat served as the ship set sail for Tarshish. But when Uncle Jonah was tossed from that ship into the mouth of a great floating wooden whale built specially for the occasion, the force of his landing made it leak, and the whale began to sink. Poor Uncle Jonah's foot was trapped between two wooden whale molars, and like his namesake, he was carried by the whale to the bottom of this very lake."
Tomo glanced at me and shook his head. He was trying very hard not to laugh.
"Well, we're sorry your great-uncle died in the mouth of a giant fake whale." "Oh, he didn't die," said Bart. "He was rescued and passed away quietly in his bed 10 years later."
And then his voice fell to a whisper.
"But the horror of that moment never left him."
Just then, Jesus walked by. "So, are you coming?" he asked, and he smiled especially hard at Bart. "The show will be just fine." "Absolutely," I answered.
"Just say the word,"
added Tomo.
"Ready when you are,"
said Bart with a little wave. Jesus hopped into the boat, and Tomo and I just stared at Bart.
"So what happened to not going?"
asked Tomo. "In the memory of your dear departed uncle," I added.
"I don't know," Bart shrugged. "That follow-me look in his eye gets me every time."
Then he leapt on board, with Tomo and me close behind. Everything went well at first, but the further we sailed from the shore, the choppier the waves became, and the greener Bart's face grew.
"Not looking good, big fella," said Tomo.
Maybe you'd better lie down," I suggested. Bart waved us away and opened his mouth as though to say, "I'll be fine," or "It'll pass," or "Don't worry." But what came out instead was and the better part of his breakfast. Tomo peeped overboard.
"Toast, eggs, porridge. You may well, my friend."
But all Bart could do was again. "It looks like his lunch this time," I observed. "The bread and meat I recognize, but what are all those tiny yellow things?" Jesus was looking now, too.
"Corn,"
he noted, matter-of-factly. "A bit of a minor miracle, I'd say, seeing as we won't see corn in this part of the world for another 1,400 years or so."
"How about that?"
said Tomo. "Well done, big fella," I added. But all Bart could offer was another "What Wasn't long, however, before everyone on board was looking for a different kind of miracle. Choppy waves turned to churning waves, and then the stormy waves that washed right over the boat. "Help!" cried Tomo. "Save us!" I cried.
I'm coming, Uncle Jonah,
cried Big Bart.
Save a seat in your heavenly whale for me.
We weren't the only ones crying for help. Peter and Andrew and the rest of the fishermen were terrified too. And Jesus?
Where's Jesus? Called Tomo. He was here a minute ago.
Can't see him, I called back. I hope he wasn't washed out to sea. And then, over the roaring of the storm, we heard somebody snoring.
Found him,
hollered Big Bart.
And you'll never guess, he's asleep.
Wake up, Jesus, wake up, we all cried together. And Jesus opened his eyes and rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly and shook his head. Did I miss anything? "Miss anything?" shouted Tomo. "Look!" And just then an enormous wave knocked us all off our feet. "Point taken," said Jesus. And he looked up at the thundery sky and said quietly, "Lighten up. It's getting a little noisy down here." Then he turned to the churning waves and added, "You need to calm down too." And not a second later, the sea was still, the sun was shining, and the sky was a bright light blue. Jesus looked at Bart and smiled. "Told you the trip would be fine." Then he curled up again and fell back to sleep. Bart shook his big head. He could hardly believe it.
"Now that's what I call a miracle, lads,"
he said. But Tomo and I weren't listening. The storm had turned our stomachs up along with the waves, and we were hanging over the side of the boat.
"Look,"
said Bart.
"more yellow things. Now you're making those little miracles too."